Hello teachers, thank you for watching this screencast on EverTracker's participation category. The participation category is used to equalize student participation and improve student focus. It allows you to randomly call on students and score the effort they exhibit. Use the participation category to call on students to answer questions, make predictions, offer opinions, read aloud, etc. In this screencast, I'll show you some examples of how I use participation in my classroom. But first, a bit about EverTracker's button choices. From the main menu, choose a class or subject. I'll choose Period 4 Science. Use this button to return to a list of your classes. The top row shows EverTracker's category choices. You can tell which category you are presently in because the button will be lighter than the others. All the students that are in Period 4 Science are listed here in a random order. Scores are out of 10, so think of 9.5 as 95%. 8.5 is 85%, etc. The score buttons are large so that a user can hold their smartphone or iPod Touch in one hand and use their thumb to do the scoring. Use the Save button to save data to the EverTracker server. This will also ensure that the next time you use the participation category, you will start at whichever student you left off at. Now I'll show you an example of how I use participation when I present questions to my classes. Here is an example question. What are the 3 raw materials needed for photosynthesis? Often before calling on the first student, I ask students to share their thinking with a neighbor or within their group for a short period of time. This takes some of the pressure off a student when they are selected by the app because their response is not based solely on their own thinking. So I start with Michael and Michael responds, sunlight is one of the raw materials needed for photosynthesis, so I give him a 9.5. And then I call on Cheryl and she says she doesn't know, which is a low effort response because the expectation is that students will demonstrate that they have been paying attention. What Cheryl needed to say was something like, I can't remember the other 2 materials needed for photosynthesis. By repeating part of the question in her response, she shows that she had been tracking. And this expectation helps other students because they have a chance to hear the question again. Here's a sample scoring rubric found on our website and within EverTracker's Teacher's Manual for participation L1 questions. I won't read this to you, so go ahead and pause the screencast if you would like more time to review it. If Cheryl had followed the expectation of including the question in her response, and if this was relatively new content, I would have scored her a 9.5. If it was a content area that we had covered a few times, I would have given her a 9 score. But since Cheryl's effort was low, I'd select a score between 6 and 0. Next I call on Lindsay and she responds, water is needed for photosynthesis. And Jimmy says, I don't recall the 3rd material needed for photosynthesis. At this point I would use the app to call on 1 or 2 more students, and then ask for hands to get the final raw material, carbon dioxide. I may then go back to Cheryl using a technique called No Opt-Out from Lemov's book, and ask Cheryl to give me 2 of the raw materials. And if she could comply, I would raise her score from a 6 to a 7.5 or an 8.5. Now I'll discuss using the participation category to call on students to read aloud. Or you may wish to review Chapter 10 of the book Teach Like a Champion for more detailed tips. I grabbed this article from Wikipedia to use as an example of how to assign reading. It's about wolf and moose dynamics on Isle Royale in Lake Superior. The goal when reading aloud in class is to have one student as the primary reader and the remaining students as attentive secondary readers. To accomplish this goal, change the primary reader frequently and unpredictably. EverTracker helps in this goal because students cannot predict when they will be asked to read and therefore should be more engaged as secondary readers. Keep section lengths fairly short. Keeping lengths short has the added benefit of requiring more focus by secondary readers. If you instead always break at the end of a paragraph, some students will not read along but instead just watch for paragraph changes. The transition from one primary reader to the next should be done with a minimum of words. Thank you. Next is Jordan. During the reading or beforehand, create comprehension questions to ask. Tell students to use their finger to mark their place while the question is being asked and answered. Another strategy to use when reading more challenging text, referred to as bridging in Teach Like a Champion, is to have the teacher read between primary readers to, quote-unquote, keep the narrative thread alive and create more opportunities to model. With 5 reading parts and 2 comprehension questions, at least 7 different students would have been called on to cover this section of the article. Here is the suggested scoring rubric for participation L1 readers. I won't take the time to read it to you, so pause the screencast if you would like time to review it. One last thing I want to mention is that the participation category has 3 separate randomly ordered student lists or pools, L1, L2, and L3. During this screencast I've been continuously using the L1 pool. Give some thought as to how you might like to use the L2 and L3 pools. Some teachers choose to use them to designate higher level questioning. For example, questions that require the student to recall facts could be considered level 1 questions. Those that require the student to show understanding could be considered level 2 questions, and those where the student has to analyze, synthesize, or evaluate could be considered level 3 questions. Refer to the Effort Tracker manual for more details. Or just think of L2 and L3 as additional lists for your use. For example, L2 could be used to call on students to work on a problem on the whiteboard, and L3 could be used to keep track of which students have had a turn to perform a task that normally generates many volunteers: scorekeeper during a game, help with a demonstration, errand to the office, etc. Thank you for watching this screencast on Effort Tracker's participation category. Please let other educators know about Effort Tracker.